Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this session specifically designed for our authorized prep providers. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are joined by Marissa, our International Marketing Manager, as well as Anne. Anne is the Senior Test Developer Product Development and Innovation Research Manager. It's a long job title with GED Testing Service. Her past work experience includes managing the development of large national standardized state assessments, military assessments for translators and interpreters, and an assessment for English language learners who are also specifically cognitively disabled at GED Testing Service and continues to research various approaches to enhance the GED test and improve test taker outcomes. And for us is anything related to the GED test. And we're very excited that she could join us again to talk about teaching resources. Anne, thanks so much for joining us this early in the morning for you. And over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Yes. Thank you, Lindsay. My job title is the longest in the company. It is, as you can imagine, Senior Test Product Development and Innovation Research Manager. So you can guess there's two jobs in there with an and in between. I've been with GED Testing Service for 13 years now, and I'm on the assessment team, and I am coming to you live early morning from a gloomy, rainy, humid Washington, D.C. today. So today we're going to talk about teaching resources. But before we do that, I want to actually do a little bit of a introduction to the GED test, the GED Ready Practice Test, and talk about the score report and the study plan that you can actually get from that. So then we'll dive into the assessment guide for educators, talk a little bit about what it is and where to find it, then go into the performance level descriptors, what those are, and how you can use that in your classroom with your students. The high impact indicators, going deeper diving into those performance level descriptors and looking at the relationships of the high impact indicators across the content areas, how you can use those in your classroom and specifically applications for, I'm only going to choose one of those high impact indicators, which is visual literacy or data literacy, particularly within social studies and science, and leave you today with more resources that you're going to need and that you can have in your classroom, particularly focusing on the free practice tests and how you can use those in your classroom today. So let's just start with the overview of what is the GED test, what is the GED Ready test and how to use it, and the score reports or study plan and how to use that in your classroom with your students. So the bread and butter of the GED is the GED test, and it is made up of four content areas. So the first is reasoning through language arts. You'll notice that it is reasoning through language arts. It is reading and writing. We put those together instead of separating those out because you can't do one without the other. And that ended up with 150 minutes. It's the longest of our four tests. There are three parts. And once you finish the first part, it is each part is timed separately. So you finish the first part, a little pop-up will come up for the student, and it will ask the student, do you want to go on to the next section? And they have to click yes. And then, just in case we want to make sure that they actually do want to go on to the next section, it says, are you really sure you want to go on to the next part? And they have to click yes. Once they go through the first part, clicking those twice, they go to the second part. It's the 45 minutes extended response portion, and it is also timed separately. And if they go on, they finish their extended response, those two pop-ups will come up again. Are you really sure you want to go on to the next part? This is really important because they can't use that time in the third part. It's all timed separately. And so after they finish the second part, they do receive a 10-minute break. So that's important for you to tell your students that they want to use up all of that 45 minutes. It's not going to be added to any of the extra parts. Next is the mathematical reasoning test. It's 115 minutes. Again, there are two parts. The calculator is not on screen and not allowed for the first part. Once they finish the first part, those two pop-ups will come on again. Are you really sure you want to move on? They'll go into the second part, at which stage the calculator will appear at the top left-hand corner of their screen. I'll talk more about this as we go through some of the other resources I'm going to show you. But again, it's important to tell them that they cannot go back to the first part. The other two are social studies at 70 minutes and science at 90 minutes. These are only one part, so they can go back and forward as they wish. At the bottom of this screen here, it says about the test on GE.com. That's an actionable link that you can go and click on to go and see more about each of the four content area tests. Internationally, we report out the performance levels at a below passing and a pass or high school equivalency. So 100 to 144, that is not a passing standard. 145 to 200 is passing and indicates that the student is at high school equivalency. But if they get closer to 200, they could also be ready for credit-bearing post-secondary coursework. And I'll get into that in a bit too. We also have the GED Ready practice test. So this is an online test that can be taken anywhere, as opposed to the GED test that is taken in a testing center. What is unique about the official practice test is that these tests have been normed and standardized the same as the GED test. So this allows us to have built in a predictive validity, which allows us to tell you if your student, if they score at a certain score, are likely to pass. Now, you increase that probability of them likely to pass a GED test if you tell your students that they should take the test after they score a green within the next 14 days. The closer to when they take the GED ready, are they ready to take the test, allows them to increase the probability of them passing the actual GED test. That is a really important part of the practice test. It is half the length, but because they buy the test, they can actually stop and start at any time because we know that life gets in the way and they don't want to waste their money. However, I have to stress, for them to really make the best use of the official practice test is to take it in a quiet area, really focusing in on their time management skills and not using any devices to help them out to answer the questions. This sets them up for the testing center and also sets them up to be really have a positive outcome on the GED test, the best possible. The GED Ready test reports out on 3 different score levels. So not likely to pass, 100 to 133. This would tell you that there are many skills that the student really needs to work on. Too close to call. Some students, if they score into the 140, 144 range, they go on and take the GED test and they pass the test. It's really hard for us to judge in our predictive validity if they're going to actually pass. But likely to pass, again, I can't stress enough, when they take the GED Ready test within those next 14 days, they should really go on and take the GED test. They are more likely to pass than not. So you're increasing their odds. So not likely to pass, it seems like it's kind of a negative outcome. However, with the GED test and the GED Ready test, both tests the student receives a score report. Here's an example of the score report of Too Close to Call. So you see at the top, there's the graphic. You see the 138, it's too close to call. We can't really tell if you're going to pass or not. We're not going to say that. But if you in your classroom have a study material that GED testing service has approved, you can link your study material to their score report, or they can do it too. So all they do is they go in to link your study material, and there's a list of either online courses or textbooks that we have approved as actual GED testing service approved materials, and they can go through and link that. What that does to their score report is when you go down to your skills to improve checklist, you will see that it says study pages 420 to 421. Underneath that is the skill that they need to improve. So this turns into not only a score report telling what the score is, but it becomes a study plan. At the top right-hand corner, you can print that. And when you print it, there's going to be lines there that you can create notes to the student to see what they have to improve upon. So the score report becomes the study plan. It is found in your student's account, or if you have GD Manager access, you can find it in there too. As I just talked about, you can focus it as a study plan. There's instructional feedback. So on the RLA GED Ready test, if you scroll to the bottom of the score report, you'll find what your student wrote as the extended response. We also provide online scoring tools for the extended response. So you can go through and you can score it. And online, we have professional development where you can learn how to do that. And I'll get to that later. But you can score it and you can give improvement strategies to your student for what they need to work on for their extended response. Okay, so we've gone through the GED test, the GED Ready test, and the score report. Now, what do we need to know more about teaching in the classroom? For you, we're going to focus on the international or other countries' website. We're going to talk about teaching the GED test part, and then showing you where to find what can help you in the classroom, what are the skills that we assess, and what is some professional development that you can have. On the left-hand side here, I just show you the high impact indicators, educator guides, and the skills students need to pass. Very important. Talk on that today. Here is a screenshot of GE.com. I've circled at the top there other countries and the educators and admins. So first you're going to select other countries, and then you're going to click on educators and admins. Then this will show up, teaching the GED test. These three tiles are what we're going to talk about the teaching resources, the middle one today, but I just want to talk about what's in these other two tiles. So free classroom materials. This is really important for you to go and have a look at, to look at the tutorials that we have, setting students up with all of these non-impactful tasks. So a tutorial just takes them through what to expect the functionality of the computer-based test, what they should be focusing on, how to cut and paste, things like that. So it's low stakes, but they can go and play with the functionality and become familiar with it because it's not like a Word document. There's different ways that it works. And at the bottom, there's some videos about how to write a good extended response. There's a lot of information there for you. And then the other one is the professional development tile. This is really helpful for you. These are free professional development webinars that we have recorded. You can also sign up for in-session, which means that you can see Tuesdays for Teachers. Doesn't matter if the time zone because they're all going to be recorded, but you'll be notified when the recording is available. And you can go and see what we're hearing from the field in terms of some skills that students are having a really hard time understanding, and we'll give some teaching tips like that. And also just some things in the past of, where do I find this as a resource? There's some easier ones like that too. So go and have to check that out. But today we're going to look at the teaching resources specifically. And so here is where you'll find all of the skills of what we're testing, and the next slide is the assessment guide for educators. So as I said, I'm on the assessment team, and my career has been test development. So for me, as a person who creates tests and develops tests, this assessment guide for educators is the recipe book. We cannot be any more transparent about what is actually on the test than our assessment guide for educators. This is how you can actually know in math, reasoning through language arts, social studies, or science, exactly what is on the test. Not only the skills, but also what is the content topic. I'm often asked what is on the test in terms of science, the content, what is on the content? And I continue to tell people, remember, our test is a skills-based test. What that means to me, as I described to my mother, is it means that I've got my hand on a steering wheel in a car, and all I'm testing is can I turn left or can the student turn right? The car could be a truck, it could be a mini, it could be a van. That doesn't matter to me. That content could be very contextualized. It's either science content or it's social studies content. But the skill that goes across these different content areas could be still the same. So I still want to know what is the skill that my student's going to need to know. And here in the assessment guide for educators, this example here, quantitative problem solving assessment targets of the content indicators. Indicators is another word we use for skill. Apply number sense concepts, including ordering, rational numbers, absolute value, multiple factors, and exponents. That is the assessment target. And then the skills specific to that assessment target are listed underneath. And you can find all of these in the assessment guide for educators. Both of those links there are active, so you can go right there. To visually understand this, the assessment targets, I always use an umbrella. The assessment target is the broader general idea, as I just pointed out. But underneath there, we go into those fine grain skills. Again, with my analogy of driving a car, the fine grain skill is do I turn left or can I turn right? Or can I gear down or can I brake? Those are the skills that we actually have on the test. We list them all out in the AGE. And then the next important part is the application. What does your student work look like? Here's an example of what we give on our high impact indicators. So the assessment target, the investigation design. Wow, is that ever broad, right? So then you look in the AGE underneath, and it says the student needs to identify and refine hypotheses for scientific investigations. They need to identify and interpret independent and dependent variables in scientific investigations. All right, so now I know they need to do something, right? That's the skill that we're testing. So what does that look like for your student? Here's what you want to have, what your student has to do. They have to identify a hypothesis for a given scientific investigation. They could also differentiate between an appropriate hypothesis and a poorly conceived hypothesis. They can use a hypothesis to support or challenge a given conclusion. So as a previous teacher, I look at that and I see a number of different exercises that I could create for my students to really elicit and focus them to work on these different skills. So the way to look at our test is it's a skills-based test, and we put it all in the AGE, so you know exactly what's going to be on the test. That's possible. This also allows us to report out at a performance level. As I said, internationally, it's a pass, no pass. However, we also lay out the descriptors of the performance levels, the PLDs. So when people say to me, my student just passed at a 145, but they want to go to university, how can I help them score higher? Well, in the States, we have four levels. For you on the other countries and the teaching resources, we have provided what we call Pass Plus and Pass Plus Plus. The student will still receive a pass or no pass score. However, a pass plus and a pass plus plus allows you to know what skills they need to to do well on in order to score higher if that's what they like. We also have PLDs for the GED ready. So here you see yellow, red, and green. What does that mean? What kind of skills does that mean that they actually need to work on with a yellow? In there, you'll find everything you need to know in order to help your students increase their score. So even though I told you it's going to get their score is going to be a pass or a no pass, here you can help. This is to put in perspective for you. A 145 to a 164 is the high school equivalency. If they score a 145 to a 200, they're going to get a high school equivalency. But for you in the classroom to know what a pass plus and a pass plus plus is, I provided the 165 to 174 as a pass plus and a 175 to 200 as a pass plus plus. So it's really important to know, as I said, how to improve your student's score if they want to get higher. The individual PODs are available, but what we've done above and beyond is we've also given you per content area, across all the content areas rather, we've given you what does that mean in RLA if they've got a high school equivalency? What are the skills that they know in math at a high school equivalency, in science and social studies? So here you can see the four different columns, and it will give you a very good brief overview of what that means. This can help you in the classroom. So how to use the PODs in your classroom. You can use them to assess your students' current level when you're looking at the skills that they need to acquire, and you can see if they're using those skills or not. Once you determine that they're good at these skills, then you can see, are they actually ready to take a test? Give them a GED ready test, get that score report, see what the determination is. If they're not, because this study plan can help you shape their learning activities. And then it can also help you in your lesson planning. So now we've looked at the test, we looked at the GED Ready test, we looked at the score report, the performance level descriptors. Let's go deeper diving into the high impact indicators. And then to the relationship between those skills in the high impact indicators. So the high impact indicators, I like to call them the biggest bang for your buck. So what are those skills that are going to help my students do best? And we have helped to determine and through research, figure out which skills to focus you on. So they're applicable in all the content areas. And based on research, we looked at those students who are getting that loop from 140 to 145. What were the skills that they were getting wrong, whereas the ones who were scoring higher were getting right? And by doing such, we found out that there are certain skills that those who are scoring higher may have received in class or maybe not in class, these actual unique skills to use. So it might be that these skills that we're talking about in the high impact indicators previously did not receive as much coverage in the classroom. And so we tried to put them together that would help with instruction. So not only identifying these high impact indicators, or remember indicators as skills, but how does that look like in the classroom? So here's an example from RLA, ordering sequences of events in texts. Not only that, but it's primarily we measure those in literary texts. And if you remember, we have both informational and literary text on the RLA. The informational texts are 70% and literary text is 30% of the test. So here, specifically within literary text, ordering sequences is difficult. Those who are scoring higher were getting that right more often. So what does that look like for your students? You should work with them to locate a single or discrete event or plot points in texts. Get them to identify chronological and non-chronological sequences of events within texts. These are the things that we want them to work on. And you can see this and you can already understand. You're sitting there thinking, I know what kind of exercises to do. So this is really helpful for you in your classroom to focus in on that sequence of events or the one underneath. There's many different high impact indicators. I just chose these two randomly. Determine the meaning of words and phrases as they're used in a text, including determining conative and figurative meanings from context. Those ones are more difficult. So there's the focus on each content area high impact indicators. But what was more interesting and what we focused in on is that certain skills are not only about one content area. There's relationships between these skills. Just as I said, the RLA test is reading and writing because those skills are not separate of each other. The same is true for all of these other kinds of skills too. And so it really helps out in the classroom. So here's an example of another document we have out there about the relationships. Today, we're just going to focus, I'm going to use visual literacy, data literacy, because this seems to be one of the real sticking points for our students. And whether it's taught in class or not, it's a very difficult skill for a lot of our students to get. So here I'm going to use science. So this science, expressing scientific information or findings visually, we found that through the other three content areas, it's also those are the skills that we're testing as well. This is helpful for you because you can see that if you're teaching Anne in science, you're showing them visuals, but I'm not doing that well. But someone who's also in social studies and you know that they're doing well with their data literacy, you can look across here and you can see other things, other skills that could be worked on to help your students. At a high level of the assessment targets, if we're looking at science, expressing scientific information, at a high level in the assessment targets, we have social studies. They're also going to be asked to integrate content presented in different ways. So not only text, but also visuals. RLA, they're going to be asked to analyze how two or more texts address similar themes or topics. And in math, they're going to be asked to abstract problems, all not necessarily only text. So when we look at the actual high impact indicators and dig deeper into this visual literacy skills, you can see how you could pick out from the previous relationship document I showed specific ones that all include visuals. So look at the left-hand corner here, social studies. Analyze information presented in a variety of maps, graphic organizers, tables, charts, a variety of visual sources such as artifacts, photographs, and political cartoons. The same is true for RLA. They're going to have to look at visual information. They're going to have to clarify that contradictive information, and math represent real-world problems visually. So the skill sets are all very similar. Here is where you can find the high impact indicators and the relationships across content areas. Those are active links right there. But for today, just briefly, I want to focus in on the social studies and science with the high impact indicators for visual literacy. And how can you use that? So visual literacy is a skill of decoding, interpreting, creating, questioning, challenging, evaluating texts that communicate with visuals alone or in addition to words. Visually literate people can read, interpret the purpose and intended meaning, evaluate the form, structure, and features of the text, use images in a creative and appropriate way to express meaning. So visual literacy is very important in their daily life and trying to understand what they're looking at. So here we're going to focus in on science specifically. So expressing scientific information or findings visually. Here I'm looking at the high impact indicator that expressly says what the student should be doing. So creating those exercises for them to focus in and really do well on this particular high impact indicator. So translate information presented verbally and numerically into a visual format, integrate information presented verbally, numerically in a visual format. And here is an example from our free practice test that is online, and I'll talk about that. But here, you remember the AGE, the Assessment Guide for Educator, lists all of the skills that we will possibly have on the test that you can have to teach in class. But at the bottom of the AGE in each specific content area, there is a list of content topics to help you guide your science in your science class. Obviously, you know, science is a huge, broad spectrum of content areas. Well, we wanted to help you narrow down the content of what you're teaching in your class. So this is content topic LF1, common ancestry and cladograms. So it's important when you look at this cladogram to teach your students visually what that is and how to read the cladogram. So it tells which organisms are most closely related to each other and which are not closely related to each other. This is an example of visual literacy being tested in science. Now let's have a look at social studies, how visual literacy is actually being taught in social studies. Analyze information presented in a variety of maps, graphic organizers, tables, and charts, and a variety of visual sources such as artifacts, photographs, political cartoons. Okay, analyze is a loaded word, so what does that really mean? Well, they're going to need to make inferences. So making a logical guess or reading between the lines. This is rather fuzzy, right? So it's kind of like the chemical process of forming a chemical compound where you take two elements and you combine them to make a new substance. So readers can take their own experiences and combine them with information they gather from what they read. So to help in the classroom to do something like this, teach them how to gather clues, look at what they're looking at, and read between the lines, make those guesses. But step two, they have to reach these conclusions based on what they're seeing, the evidence and the reasoning. And does that make sense? So in the classroom, we can teach from simple to complex. So they're looking for clues to make a decision. So they can range from simple things that you can give them pictures or advertisements, all the way to those longer, more intricate passages or nonfiction. Remember, RLA, there's up to 700 words on those passages. So when they're asked for inferences, they're going to have to look and dig deep into there to find the clues. But an advertisement is a really good way to start off with. So you could ask them to look at this advertisement and just ask them, what do they see in the advertisement? And does it remind them of anything? What is the purpose of the advertisement? And what inferences can they make based on the advertisement? What is the advertisement telling them? Here's an example of just giving them a basic photograph and asking them, what do you observe in this picture? What does it remind you of? What's the purpose of the photographer? And what inferences can you make based on what you see in this picture? So if you can think right now, we're testing the skill of inference. The content, the context is the picture. You change the picture, you ask the same questions. That's what I'm talking about driving the car. You're asking the same questions to get at that inference, that skill, but you can change the content. So here, think about what you're observing in this picture compared to the last. What does it remind you of? What's the purpose of the photographer? And what inferences can you make based on this picture? For this, you can create a simple graphic organizer for your students so they can work through these images. You can ask them, what do you observe and what else? What does it remind you of? Is there another image or a personal experience? What's the artist's purpose? Analyze, persuade, express, document, or entertain. And so what? What does it matter? What is the significance? And they can put the answers there. Closing out today, I want to leave you with some resources so that you can have some more tools in your tool belt. Again, I'm going to take you to the GED.com for other countries and click on educators and admins. Go to teaching the GED test. Remember, those are three tiles. I'm going to focus on the free classroom materials this time. So this is where you're going to find things for your classroom, such as the tutorial, but also the calculator tutorial. This is of utmost importance for you to help your students understand how to use the calculator on screen. It is rather large, they have to move it around, and they really need to become comfortable with that. It is on the math test, but it's also for specific questions on science or social studies. If the content specialists who create the test determine that your students are going to need to have a calculator to figure this out, a calculator will be provided on screen for them. Underneath there, you'll see the free practice test and the study guides. The free practice test is really important. You can use it in your classroom. On each of the 4 content areas, there's only 10 questions. You can use it in a myriad of ways. This is just one way to use it with your students, where you can have them go through and look at the functionality. If your student is freaked out by the fact that it says question 1 of 10 and they don't want to know how many questions they have, they can click that and it will close. They can also click flag for review and it will light up. They can open the calculator. They can work with the calculator. They can see the formula sheet. We're not testing if they can know the slope of a the formula. We give all of the formulas so that they can really show us that they can use that formula. They can process and give the right answer. The same is true for the calculator reference sheet there. We don't want to know if they can memorize how to use the calculator for scientific notation, for example. That calculator reference can be opened up and they can say, I don't remember how to use the calculator for scientific notation. They can practice and they can remember it because we're not testing recall. We're not testing if you can use a calculator or not. We want to know if you can work out this word problem. So that allows them to practice with all of those online on-screen functionality. Also, you can have them go through and then they can come back and they can look at those answer explanation right up in the top left-hand corner. This is really important in using in the classroom because not only does it tell them if they got it right or wrong, it tells them why they got it incorrect. So say, for example, I chose B. Option B is incorrect. If you selected the response, you used 8 as the typical number of hours in a workday instead of the actual elapsed time of 7 hours. And also option C, if you got it right, if you selected this response, you divided the total cost by the number of hours, 7, that the wallpaper steamer was rented. So it's very specific, and you can use those in your classroom to help your students to see how they progress or to see where they land. Once you see what the questions are, you can actually see where they land on the performance level descriptors. My final takeaway today is everything that you should do to help your students. Number 1, go ahead and create your own GED.com student account. It's free. This allows you to go in, you experience the sign up questions for the account so you can really help your students get through that sign up process. You can get into your own account. You can see exactly what's offered, all the free materials in there, all the videos, everything that you might want to point that out to your students and they can actually work with you through those different materials, or you can give it as homework. Really want you to take a GED Ready test. This not only prepares you to understand what that experience is like, but also to see the limitations of what happens on the test of the real estate, the size of the screen, things like that. And so you can get those vouchers if you want. If you ask Ben, your international director, he will be able to give you those. And then obviously, I can't point out enough. Today I was pointing out GE.com, other countries, educators and admin, it's all there right for you. So go there and bookmark that and utilize that as much as possible. And that does it for me, Lindsay. Thank you,
Well,
everyone.
thank you so much, Anne. I think it's very insightful. I particularly like the explanation of the answer for the GE Ready test. And I think it's a great tool for educators to use to explain to students where they went wrong on the test. What we can do now is we can stop the recording and really start answering any questions. If you do have specific questions, please feel free to post them in the webinar chat.